And where's the best place to look, by the way? At you on the screen, or I feel like that makes the interview a little bit better.
If you look at the camera, then it looks like you're looking at me.
Like I actually know where the camera is. Okay, very good. Okay, right. I look at the camera. Okay.
Well, it's really good to meet you at long last.
Yeah. Yes, I'm really happy to meet you too. Hi, my name is Marjorie Cramer, aka Marge, and I have been involved in animal liberation or animal rights issues since forever. It seems like it was happened when my oldest daughter was 7 and decided she wanted to be vegetarian. And my reaction to that at the time was, well, you'll probably die. You can't do it. And then the rest is history. So I and both of my daughters eventually became vegan and have participated in many, many ways in animal issues. I am a surgeon. I'm trained in general surgery and plastic surgery, and I'm retired now. But I had 35 marvelous years doing something that I really loved, and that I tried to incorporate in my sensibilities about animal issues, and that's it. What else? Yes, and how to me, looking back on my life, about my involvement in various issues, I see issues of compassion for animals, compassion for people, feminism, and misogyny, and the environment, and sensibilities. You could go on forever with this, to racism and so on. But I think that the important thing is that I can't really figure out when these were separate issues for me. I mean, I know that I started out as a very small child being very difficult because my mother could never read me books when I was very little that had anything to do with animals getting lost or suffering or getting hurt. And so she just, sidelined those books. And I still have never read Anna Sewell's Black Beauty because I just, at the age of 10, couldn't deal with it. So that's, always been there and really unvocalized. And then going to, I'm also English, and I started out being born in England and living there until I was 16, and then came here. And when I went to university here, most people, boys I dated or friends or family members, not my family members, but other families' members, if I said, well, I want to be a doctor, they would say, yeah, you really can't do that. You're really poor and you're a woman, and, it's just not going to work. And that's, as I, we all know that that's a sort of litany that's recited all the time. So that's when I sort of became interested, or not really interested, but cognizant of issues of how women were treated, things that, as we all know, you just accept things, and then one day you say, wait a minute, that's just not right, let's change it. And so that somewhere along the way became tied up with concerns about the environment or concerns about animal suffering. And of course, as time went on in medical school, it was quite painful for many reasons. And let me add that I would do it again if I could. I loved it. But with the misogyny and really harassment from some of the professors and some of the students, and having to do awful things in animal labs. And I don't think I articulated it in any way at that point. But after I had finished medical school and was had done my surgery residency and was in practice, I became quite involved in animal issues and feminist issues.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just wondering I'm sure you've heard of these women who've come before, but your story sounds very similar to that of Lizzie Lind Hagby. Hagby, I can't pronounce her name. She's Swedish, and Anna Kingsford in England at the turn of the 20th century. Have you heard of them?
I have not, I'm embarrassed to say.
I'm so excited to tell you about them. But they
No.
were women like yourself who, well, I think they were a little bit more, first off, motivated by what was happening to non-human animals in the medical laboratories. And they decided, they were some of the first women in England to get medical degrees so that they could gain access and have also gain credibility as they were women in the Victorian time. But your story sounds very reminiscent of that, where you faced the odds, went in and had to deal with this institutional sexism, and then come through the other end and still maintain, you weren't fully absorbed and socialized into that sort of misogynistic culture.
I think that it's probably a story that goes back to the time of Eve, because I don't know much about movements before really uh, you know, the suffragists, and I know that they were involved in all kinds of what should we call it, oppressions. That they were aware of I believe they're the people who fought about the black dog statue, the little black dog statue, which I want to cry when I say that. And and sexism and racism. And so I think movements for change have always been multifaceted.
Yeah.
And there's, a primary movement, but most people tend to have a sensibility about some or other forms of oppression. So I think that we like to think, I like to think that feminism started in the 70s when I was growing up, and my grandchildren think that it started now, in 1924 or 2024 or something. And so I suspect that in most liberation movements, that's been a constant, that there has to be somebody who somehow comes to the realization that it's not okay to do this, and when I look back, when I try to explain to my grandchildren that I couldn't, when I was in college, when I was married at the end of college, I couldn't get a credit card because it had to be in my husband's name. And they really dismiss that and sort of think that, well, you should have said something. That's really stupid, So I think it's a complicated thing, but I'm happy that there are people like you and people like my grandchildren, the young people, who hopefully will make huge differences in the world.
And one of the things is this project is just to coalesce the information and all these wisdoms, because you do feel in the work that we do quite alienated. And I think it's a bit sad. So there's these women who are doing this 120 years ago, and have really, that amazing history has sort of been lost. I think that I was an activist for many years before I started getting interested in the feminist side of the movement, and I really had to dig to find this history. So it's another reason why I'm really glad that you're able to take some time with me and share some of the things that you've accomplished and thought about over the years, because if we don't actively coalesce it, it gets forgotten.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully that young people who have this passion for life and want to reinvent the world they're the ones who save it.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me a little bit more about what it was like when you were, I guess, coming into more of an activist phase? So you're taking this knowledge that you have from your medical training and you're sharing that. So that's great insider expertise that most folks don't have. So how are you able to use that towards vegan and feminist causes?
Well, there were two organizations that I first became aware of. One was Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which everyone knows about and is big, and not everyone necessarily agrees with everything on, but they, in the early days at least, were extremely important in making this change of consciousness. And then the Medical Research Modernization Committee, which was an organization that consisted simply of physicians. And the people who founded it were rather more on the intellectual side and really focused not on necessarily the cruelty involved in laboratories, but in simply trying to explain why that was just not it was a kind of a stupid way to go about finding out things about people, critiquing other people's work and sort of going through and saying, okay, these papers used animals and these are the conclusions. Now let's look after they were written and see how many people referred back to them to show us how useful they were. And that was where I got started. And then that was not a very visible, the Medical Research Modernization was not a terribly visible organization, but we did have meetings and publish papers and Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which really was very much associated with PETA, I think did some extremely important work and has done and probably still do. And in kind of outing the fact that these are the things that medical schools and research people do to animals, and quite graphically explaining it and commenting on how it didn't make a huge amount of sense most of the time, and also doing demonstrations and doing things that shocked people, which is, these are all different facets, I guess, of the animal rights movement.
Well, if you're trying, the goal was to highlight that this research really wasn't necessary and really just wasn't good common sense, then what is your theory about why animal testing, vivisection continues?
Well, I mean, one simple reason is in the same way that you're a sociologist and you have tools that you use that you've learned in your training and in your practice, it's the way you live your professional life. It's the same. You can't just say to someone who, let's say, has spent 30 years experimenting on primates or rabbits or rats or any form of non-human life, that, well, what you really have to do is go back to the laboratory and find a way to do this, in a test tube or using AI or whatever way you're going to do it, because that's not something that really happens. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I'm not really sure. I think that it's a lot of people who are just invested in doing things the way they've always done them. And, it sort of ties in with how patriarchal societies work. And, this is the way I've always done it, and that's the way you have to do it, and I know better than you, et cetera, with hierarchies. And so I think, and I must say, I really lost a lot of time for the last 3 years, and I'm not looking for sympathy, but I was very sick, and I'm fine now and lovely. But I'm not sure that I know on a first name basis what's going on in this field now. I suspect it hasn't changed very much. There are, awful things that go on. But I do think that looking at things on a day-to-day basis, it looks like, well, I feel that this is wrong, but why isn't it changing? But when I look back now on my life, things have changed somewhat. And you can argue that, well, it's really not very much, or you can say, wow, we've really come a long way. And somewhere in between is probably the truth.
What are some of these advances that you see when you reflect?
Well, okay. In medical school, for example, when I was there, and I graduated in 1968, we did many animal laboratories that were really nightmare producing for me, really awful things. And mostly because of the animal rights movement and because of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, I think that this has been phased out. in medical school, in surgical training, and I think in military training, that it's unusual now. There are some holdouts, but most of the time they found out that other modalities, computer programs, models, simply learning the way people did before the modern world with researching in books. I think that that's made a huge change. There are many more people now in medical school who really are aware of what they're doing and what it really means.
So, what do you think are some of the challenges looking forward for animal liberation?
Well, again, there's two sides to it. One, I'm hopeful, and one, I'm like, not hopeful. But I think that it seems to me that the basic problem with a lot of these things, if you can find a basic problem, is that we eat meat, or you and I maybe don't, but most people do. And I think that involves, and again, I you know more about this than I do, but it seems to me that when small children say, I don't like the idea of eating dead animals or animals that had really horrible lives, the mom usually says, as I did, you'll die, or no, you can't, you're going to eat what I cook for you. And there's sort of a desensitization. It actually reminds me of what happened with the doctors in the concentration camps in World War II, that they were assigned to go to this camp where people were either used for experiments or sent to the gas ovens or used as slave labor. And they were told, you have to stand at the gate, and when people come by, you have to say, go right or go left. And the ones who go one way go to the ovens, and the others go to be slave laborers. And they couldn't do it. They would get with their colleagues in the evening and say, this is awful, I can't do this. And the colleagues would take them out drinking, and they'd talk, and they'd do their, bonding. And eventually they just became inured to it. And I think that's how it is with eating meat. That, or not, eating even products of animals who have suffered a lot, and we just don't. Well, I guess the other side of that is that I worry a lot with my grandchildren when they tell me they're going to be vegetarian or vegan or whatever. That just be careful. You need to be sure that you're eating sensibly and that you're not hurting yourself, and that's. I never found that difficult. I lived most of my life in New York City. And if you wanted to eat vegan, you had a choice of 20 restaurants or 20 stores. Now I live in a more suburban area, and it's not so easy. And there are people in many places where it's not easy and they don't eat well. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but I think that's the other side of it.
Right. So I think that's a really interesting theory there of oppression, really, that the kids are basically being programmed, socialized quite early before they even have a chance to even rationally consider it, really, because the option's sort of taken away from them. But I think also, and you can maybe verify this, that if you take the medical route and you become, even in sociology, I think that there is a socializing effect to desensitize to a lot of suffering and inequality. But certainly in medical training, when you're having to do these animal labs, I also interviewed someone who was a veterinarian who had to do quite a lot of that, obviously, to be trained for their job. But they said that a lot of it was really intentional. What's the word? Just getting you used to it, desensitizing you to it.
Oh, I agree 100%. Yes, absolutely. Because you're considered a wuss or a, silly female or whatever they consider you if you stop and think that this is causing suffering.
You think it's also an interesting thing, though, to be a woman in science, because one of the things I'm coming up from a lot of this research into vegan feminism from the 70s, 80s, 90s, I think a lot of women just got so fed up with the horrors of what was happening in vivisection that they sort of turned their back on science almost completely and started going towards the more radical raw food diets and homeopathy and all this sort of thing. So what is it like to be sort of a woman who's, attuned to and sensitive and empathetic, but also in the sciences. Do you feel like that's a weird fence to be sitting on?
I think that it's similar to what you alluded to before. I always thought there was something wrong with me, that I got upset if people said that killing mice was absolutely, don't be so silly, it's just a mouse. And it took me a long time to come, consciousness raising is just sort of such a slow incremental process to really realize that no, I'm absolutely logical. And now, I think it's very simple to say, look, when you go out to dinner with people and you don't even say anything, but it's obvious that you're eating a vegan meal, and they say that's just ridiculous. And I think and I have said, it's much more ridiculous to eat dead animals or animals that you crammed into horrible situations in their lives. So,
right.
But anyway, but that's where I came to it. But to what you said, the point before that, I know that I've spoken to many, many, many people who were really smart students in high school and valedictorian of their class, but who would fail a biology class because they refused to dissect a frog, and then said, well, I'm not going into science at all, as you said. And I think I've often considered that I became a doctor when really lots of things were stacked against me, in spite of all of that, not because of it. That somehow I didn't become so desensitized to it that and I don't know how that happens. I really don't. And I think, I don't know this. I know nothing about, but I know that there's a place in the vermis of the cerebellum where it seems from studies on MRIs on people with strokes that's where compassion sort of resides. That's where people's level of compassion is determined in a physical sense. And I would, that's ongoing, and I'd like to know more about it, but I don't know why. It's a thing that everyone says today not about just about this, but so I just don't understand how other people can see it differently from me, which is one of the problems, I think, with the animal rights movement.
Yeah. I think there's also a bit of gender essentialism when you're talking about what resides in the brain, but also to what extent is that socialized and encouraged to
yes,
I suppose. So that's one of the things I think is really great about having you interviewed, is because, again, looking back at the 1970s, 80s, 90s, feminism was very much so about, okay, well, let's reject this cold rationality of patriarchy, but then really super embrace this Earth Mama thing where, we're so inherently nurturing and mothering as women, but not all women are nurturing, not all women have children, and it
right.
perhaps reifies that binary in a way that is not always helpful.
Oh, I absolutely couldn't agree more. The pendulum swings back and forth, and yes, and that causes a lot of friction among various segments of various movements.
So we're coming towards the end, and I've asked you a little bit of the contributions you've had, gosh, in lots of different ways, to feminism, to animal rights, to really medical science in general. But if you were to look back, what would you say is your legacy, or what are you most proud of in all of this hard work and contributions you've made?
I'm not sure. I questioned whether I should even do this interview because I'm kind of over the hill, and it's hard to evaluate. And some days I think, I don't know, maybe nothing. But I'll just tell you one small thing was in Massachusetts and Connecticut. There were bills before the houses of the Congress about whether it should be optional for students in high school, not ban it altogether, but just make it optional. And I testified several years the bill would get defeated, and I testified that, and I was in a really good position to do it because I could say, look, I'm a surgeon, I cut people apart for a living, and so you can't really call me a wimp or a silly female or something like that. And I'm telling you, that that's not the reason that people are opposed to it. But I think in medicine there have been, and again, stopping a lot of the animal usage in training. I would say that's where I possibly made some dent. I really am proud of being in an organization called Feminists for Animal Rights. And unfortunately, both of the people who were really significant in that, Marty Keel and Batya Bauman, are dead. But I think that was a very important organization.
Yeah, it's definitely surfacing quite a bit in my research, and the Marty Keel archives. So
yeah,
pouring through that. So Marty's voice is loud and clear in this manuscript.
Yes.
But unfortunately, Batya's, I think, put some kind of hold on it, so it's only physically available at the library in, or gosh, where is it?
Smith College. It's Smith College, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, as in Canterbury, I could, as unfortunately, I couldn't get her in there as much. But I've been trying to pull Batya's, at least her voice from the newsletters from far as much as I can. I did not know that she passed.
She did. It was it was last week.
I see.
And just in going back, doing, quick searches of just Google searches on her, she was an amazing, amazing person who had a multifaceted life and did lots of very exciting things. And she was a very clear thinker. And Marty certainly was an absolute genius in her thought and her slide program that we had about ecofeminism. So yes.